It's horrible. I feel degraded.
The government aren't putting any money into it.
Which is very high. It is high. And it has gone up, not just in this area, we've noticed it's gone up across the country.
The phrase, you are 3 paychecks away from being on the streets, has a lot of truth in it.
The truth is, ghosts are among us. It's a normal Friday night in Lincoln, and to the casual observer, the scene is one of drunken revelry. But make a wrong turn, walk under a bridge or through a tunnel, and you will pierce the veil. Unseen and unaffected, shadows that were once people with homes, with families and dreams all of their own, cower from the night's deathly chill.
Here in Lincoln, homelessness is part of everyday life. We pass these people on the street every day without realising just how dangerous their lives truly are. Unfortunately, earlier this year, these dangers became all too real for Genderhaus Budnevik, a homeless man living on Lincoln streets who died right here in this alley.
On Saturday, the 6th of February this year, the body of a man was discovered on Greyfriars Pathway by a passerby. Emergency services attended the scene, but Mr. Budnevik, who wouldn't even be identified in the press until a week later, was already dead.
The alleyway where Mr. Budnevik died opens out onto a busy main highway. It's right next to Lincoln Central Library. There's a popular nightclub just over there, and over here there's a busy shopping centre. Lincoln's main high street is 300 metres that way, and the city's emergency night shelter is about the same distance in the opposite direction. And yet, on a quiet Friday night, in a quiet East Midlands town, in a first world nation, a man died on Lincoln streets. And I suppose there's a hell of a lot of questions. How did he die? Why was he homeless? But most importantly, how, in modern Britain, did a man die on our streets with no name and no one to care?
The problem of homelessness is as old as time. Looking back through history, you can see the problem littered throughout record and fiction. From George and Lennie wandering America in search of work in John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, to even earlier works such as the writings of the journalist Henry Mayhew, who brought the lives of London's poor to the attention of the nation's rich in his book London Labour and the London Poor. The sad truth of that work was that for some, it was a safari into another world right under their noses, and today, things aren't much better. For some people, homelessness isn't a problem. They would ask, why should we care, since it doesn't affect them directly? The truth is that homelessness can affect anyone. With that in mind, I spoke to Johnny Goldsmith of P3, a charity that helps the homeless in my local area of Lincoln, and he told me about the kinds of people that they have seen in their 4 years of operating.
Anybody, honestly, it doesn't discriminate. We've worked with, even the last month, we've worked with a 15-year-old and housed him. We've worked with a 76-year-old man and housed him. We work with women, we work with people of all nationalities, people with different support needs, people with drug misuse, alcohol misuse issues, people with ill mental health, ill physical health, people are homeless because of relationship breakdowns.
As it appears no one is really safe from homelessness, it should come as no surprise that the statistics have been slowly creeping up over the past few years. This graph shows the number of households accepted as homeless by their local authority from the start of 1998 to the end of 2015, using data from the Office of National Statistics. Looking at the graph as a whole, we can see that actually the problem of homelessness was far worse back in the early noughties. But when we go closer, we can see that following a big drop between 2004 and 2010, the figures have slowly been rising again. In fact, the ONS reports show that in 2014, the amount of people accepted as homeless had risen by 6% on the previous year. This happened again another 6% in 2015. This meant that in England, between the 1st of October and the 31st of December 2015, 14,470 people were officially recognised as homeless. Now that's less than half of all the people who applied to be recognised, and doesn't include those who are not in priority need or are considered intentionally homeless.
Now, the problem of homelessness isn't just confined to Lincoln. It happens all around the country and here as well in northeast Lincolnshire. So I've come to a day centre called Harbour Place in Grimsby to see how they help the homeless here.
I went to Harbour Place in search of a better understanding about what life is like for homeless people. With that in mind, I spoke to Dave Carlisle, a social worker who manages the day-to-day running of the centre. Now, while homelessness is indiscriminate of sex, race or age, that doesn't mean it affects everyone equally, as Dave explains.
Unfortunately, single males, single females are not high on the priority list, and so on most occasions when people present at the local authority for housing, they won't meet the priority need, and so are often just given advice to where to go for some accommodation. There's no statutory requirement to house them, and that accounts for many of ours. Are you eligible for assistance is the first question, really. It's one of the first questions, because if you're from certain Eastern European countries, you're not eligible for the benefits, and so that immediately means if you've got no recourse to public funds, nobody will accommodate you. The next thing is, are they homeless? You've got to remember, are they homeless, or have they just left a property? Maybe it's a marriage split up, and maybe they're still on the tenancy. Or did you make yourself homeless? So did your actions make you homeless? So it could be that a person's not been paying his rent. So if they're not paying the rent and have been legally evicted, then they've made themselves intentionally homeless. Are you a priority need? No, you're only priority need if you meet certain criteria through vulnerability, through age, your health, mental health, disability, whether you're pregnant or not, like that. So there's certain criteria. But if you're a single fit male, you won't meet that criteria.
It's this type of prioritisation that led Rob to get help from volunteer organisations such as Harbour Place or the Veterans Service SAFA when he became homeless, as opposed to his local council. Owing to his previous military experience, Rob has asked that we disguise his face.
I've been homeless twice in my life. I'm former military, plus I've been doing some private work. But on two occasions, we've lost contracts. I've come back to the UK and found myself in the position where the local council that I was at would not support me. And most recently, I found myself coming back from a contract about 6 weeks ago in East Africa, and when I got back, things went a bit wrong with the contracts again. I'm not with a partner at the moment. There's certain things going on with family issues at the moment, which is why I don't go to live with them. So I found myself sleeping once again, using what bit of money I had. I was sleeping in bed and breakfasts, hotels. A couple of nights I had to sleep in a bus shelter. Somebody said to me a while ago, I think it was a friend of mine that ended up in this position a while ago as well. They said you're only about 2 salaries away from being homeless. You know, you could be 2 salaries away from being homeless. Literally, if you're in a position where you're in a housing share or something like this, and you don't get any money for 2 or 3 months, that's you.
Just 2 or 3 paychecks. That's a small difference as it takes to put someone on the streets. Back in Lincoln, it's a sentiment that is echoed by Reverend Jeremy Cullymore of St Mary Le Wigford Church in the city centre. Until last summer, St Mary Le Wigford ran their own day centre for the homeless and vulnerable in partnership with local charity the Nomad Trust.
And there were many people who had been in a perfectly normal environment, but something went wrong. As we say in the army, shit happens, and it can happen even to the nicest people. And this old phrase that you are 3 paychecks away from being on the streets has a lot of truth in it.
It's often the case that homeless people are seen as monsters. In fact, many of the horror stories that I was told as a child featured murderous homeless people who visited in the night. Wes Craven has even said that a homeless man he saw as a child was one of his inspirations for the demonic murderer Freddy Krueger in his Nightmare on Elm Street series. But listening to Reverend Cullymore, it quickly becomes clear that these aren't monsters, but people who need help that they simply aren't getting, and that some of the most commonly held beliefs about them are just not true.
A huge, wide diversity of people. Yes, there are an awful lot of drug addicts and alcoholics and so on, but I learned, for example, that's not what put them on the streets. That is a consequence of being on the streets. As an ex-soldier, I know how painful the cold can be at 3 in the morning. And I was wearing the nice Gore-Tex that the Queen gave me. If you are out there in really quite dodgy clothing, the pain is intense. And a very strong Polish lager at £1 a can, and the oblivion that that can bring, or even better, the oblivion that legal highs will give you, is something to be greatly desired when you're in that much pain. I must have seen 3, 4, 5 cases of trench foot every year. I would have to cut the socks off some people. Socks. Think about being homeless. Where do you keep things? You are very vulnerable. Nice things will be stolen. You are surrounded by people who are in great, desperate need. So we would be giving away 1,000 pairs of socks a year comfortably. Comfortably that many. So often, a lot of the things that frighten people about homeless, rough sleepers, are the consequence of rough sleeping, not the cause.
So from what Reverend Collymore said, we now know that being homeless isn't exactly like what you might think. In fact, this goes even deeper into just what it means to be homeless. But many people think of rough sleepers when they talk about homelessness. This is only one form of the problem. The official government definition of homelessness is a person who does not have accommodation that they have a legal right to occupy. This basically means that people who live in unsecure accommodation, like hostels, squatters, and rough sleepers, are all identified as homeless. However, as Dave explains, there are many different types of homeless people to just the ones you can see.
75% are male, 25% female, and the main age group is 24 to 54. We don't cater so much for teenagers. We are open for people from the age of 16. However, if somebody comes in who is 16, and if they are homeless, we would refer them straight to Children's Services because it's not a service that should be in here.
Crisis, a national charity dedicated to helping single homeless people, names another group as the hidden homeless. They define these people as being outside of the mainstream homelessness accommodation, such as hostels or shelters. This means that they are not a priority for decision makers since they are out of sight of the public. In fact, some of these people might end up not being included on official UK statistics at all, since they might not even realise that they're homeless, because they're just crashing on a friend's floor for a few nights. So if people are being left off the stats, or not receiving any help because they're easy to miss, how accurate can these statistics really be?
They used to do the count where what used to happen was you would go meet at midnight and a team of you would go around all the areas to find out where the rough sleepers are. You're not allowed in buildings, you weren't allowed to go in certain parts, you just walk the streets and count people who were bedded down or about to get bedded down. But if they were walking around, you couldn't count them. And so invariably that brought a very low figure. So now the agencies that work with homeless people put together a figure that they think and who they know of who will be sleeping rough that particular night. Every time that they're going to go and register, when they go and make a homelessness claim, the local authority keeps data on whether they are eligible and just offered support, so they do keep that.
In 2014, this church served 17,113 meals to homeless or vulnerably housed people in just 1 year. A lot of people don't really understand rough sleeping or indeed homelessness.
I initially began this investigation because the problem in my local area of Lincoln was so obvious. Because a man had died on the streets in the city where I live. Because a simple walk down the high street meant seeing 3 or 4 people begging on the side of the pavement. And while I now know that just because someone is begging doesn't necessarily mean that they're homeless, I still want to know how bad the problem really is.
That's a difficult question for me to answer. What I would say is, yes, there is an issue in Lincoln. Ultimately, one person would be sleeping on the streets would be an issue, and that will be a problem. But the number of people we're finding, the figures that we're reporting, absolutely we acknowledge it's too high and there is a problem. Over the last 12 to 18 months, what we've now started to see is an increase, and that's despite the fact that we're housing more people than we ever did. We do still continue to see that increase.
It's, I suppose, for Lincoln, if you go to other bigger cities, there'll be a lot more people. But if you were to assess or analyse the individuals that come to us, there would be people who have been booted out of home by their parents, that have got dependency issues, drug and alcohol, that basically have come out of the army and found themselves rough sleeping, or relationship breaks down with spouses, a whole raft of things. But I think there are probably more people rough sleeping than come to us, but yeah, it is quite high for the size of our city.
The data in this graph was compiled by the Lincolnshire Research Observatory, a private company dedicated to collecting information about the county. This shows the proportion of homelessness in each local authority area. At just a glance, it's clear that Lincoln has a far higher than average rate of homelessness, at 4.7 homeless households per thousand. Using census data, we can estimate that there are 520 homeless people in the area of just 13 square miles. It's also worth noting that these are homeless households, meaning they count homeless families as one unit. These families are top priority for housing, so while they don't end up on the streets, they do end up in unsecured temporary accommodation, such as hostels, for months or even years on end. Shocking stories like these reach local media at least every month. In January, 2 children found the body of an Eastern European homeless man face down in Witham Way Country Park. His body was so decomposed by the time he was found that the coroner was unable to find a cause of death. In February, the body of Genda House Budnovic was found right next to Lincoln Central Library, as mentioned earlier in the programme. Another story, this time of a Lithuanian man found living in a tent in the woodlands around Lincoln. It's believed that the man had been living this way for around 6 months and was surviving by eating out of bins.
So people who are street homeless generally find themselves without doctor, without connections, without anywhere to go and do. Present themselves at 8 o'clock every evening, and we will take them in after a risk assessment, etc., and then house them for that night. As I say, it's there's sometimes 6 beds to 1 room, so it's quite compact and squashed, but that's the nature of an emergency night shelter. We're the only emergency night shelter in Lincolnshire, not just Lincoln, Lincolnshire. And we help some of the most really damaged and broken and shattered lives, and we just try to serve in the best way we can, given the sort of restrictions and restraints that are put upon us.
We use an organisation called FareShare, and FareShare provide a delivery of 5 trays of food per week. The rest of it's all donated. That's all our food, which is all donated generally. Harvest festivals, all the other things, but we're pretty lucky. So people can get a change of clothing and things like that. And we have that, and that's what they all are. We have suits in there for funerals. Unfortunately, a fair few people do die.
Listening to all this, it's hard to deny that there is a problem with homelessness in Lincolnshire. But sadly, Lincoln is not an isolated case, as Rob and Jamie, a homeless man I met in Grimsby, told me.
Horrible, because you don't know where you're going to be sleeping the nights, you don't know where you're going to get your next meal, you don't know when you're going to get a shower or anything like that. It's horrible, I feel degraded.
Dave Carlisle would confirm that homelessness is just as much of a problem on the streets of Grimsby as it is on the streets of Lincoln.
On average, we see 48 to 50 people a day, and that's been pretty constant over the last 5 or 6 years. Now the agencies that work with homeless people put together a figure that they think and who they know of who will be sleeping rough that particular night. And so in October that figure was 6. Last week it was 28. Okay, it was 28 at the beginning of last week, which is, I don't know, say the 14th of April, something like that. By the end of the week, we'd got 10 housed, so that became 18. So the figure being who are rough sleeping at the moment is around 18 to 20 people, which is very high. It is high, and it has gone up, not just in this area. We've noticed that it's gone up across the country. That's the reports we're getting.
Dave then offered to show us around some of the known squatting sites in the area of Harbour Place, discovered by their outreach teams. So we went out into Grimsby with him and Martin Williams of Harbour Place's street outreach team to get an idea for ourselves just what life can be like on Grimsby's streets.
This is one of the sheds that they'll get into. That was how easy it is just to open it up. It is, it's dry. You know what I mean? All they'll do is chuck the sleeping bags down. They'll be using drugs in here, they'll be drinking, and they'll go to sleep.
As Martin shows me around the squats, I quickly learn that it's not just a regular group of places they visit, but a regular group of people who live in them, quickly moving back in after they moved on by the council.
Oh.
Squalid conditions aside, at the next location, a disused pub, Martin explains why squats are more desirable than sleeping on the street.
And so, is that why maybe you don't see as many rough sleepers actually on the streets, because they're staying in places like this where it's safer for them?
It's safer for them, they're out of the elements, they're not running the risk of violence towards them, they're not seen. A lot of them aren't proud that they're rough sleepers, so they stay out of the way so that they're not seen.
And you were saying earlier, speaking of violence, you were saying earlier about how sometimes they will even booby trap these places once they've been in them once.
Yeah, that's to stop people that they don't want in there, such as the police, etc. So they've got some warning, because obviously there's a lot of drug use that goes on. If they've got the police just wandering in freely and they're in the middle of sorting out their drugs, it's a criminal offence.
The ingenuity of the squatters is not just limited to traps, however. They are also adept at getting into these disused buildings.
This is another door. What happened about a month ago, they had it boarded like this. Now, it was so blatant, they pulled all these boards off, and he's back in again. As you can see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws holding this board in place. And again, they'll be back in. This was another way in. They've done it all. You've got the cellar there, so you had one person that would go in through the window at the back, open up the cellar, and then the door come in this way. At one stage we had probably 12, 13 people sleeping rough in here.
For me, this tour feels very personal. Grimsby is not far from my own hometown of Hull, and the streets we travel could just as easily have been the ones I grew up on, having no idea about the struggle for life happening right underneath my nose. In the next squat, we actually find the occupant at home. However, he elected not to be filmed.
So what we've had is a few people sleeping rough in here. They built little campfires in here to keep warm. Problem is, we've got the main gas meters here for the block of flats. So obviously, drug use mixed with a fire doesn't go down too well. The whole block of flats could go up. So
when Dave and Martin take me to the final squat, an abandoned school, we find evidence someone has been there recently.
Well, this wasn't here yesterday.
That is someone's entire life contained in a carrier bag. Seeing this, and the conditions some people have to live under, makes this problem very real for me.
Well, I was talking with the guys from Harbour Place in the car on the way down here, and they were saying about how there are places like this in every city, in every part of the country, but the public, they don't see it, because that's the way the homeless people want it. You need to come out with people like them, like the council outreach teams, to actually know that this is going on and know just how bad it is. I mean, coming out today, we've seen 4 different places. There's been evidence of drug use, there's been evidence of fires, people sleeping rough, and all of these have been in populated areas. I mean, One place we looked at was just down the road from a school, just across the street from it, in fact. These aren't the kinds of places you expect people to be living in desperation, especially not in what is officially a first world country.
The problem now seems undeniable. But how did it get so bad? How did so many people end up on the streets in modern Britain, particularly in a small East Midlands city like Lincoln?
In my position, being, again, say an ex-military, and with the Seamen's and Sailors Association, I've been lucky, but they're all voluntary. Same as this place is. This is all voluntary. The government aren't putting any money into it. Now, they may be putting money into certain things. For example, the first time I became homeless, which was three years ago, I ended up in a place in Leicester, and that was actually council ran. But the organisation that came to run it were voluntary, and they were also from Outreach or something like that, and they supplied you with food parcels and things like this. But the government, which I suppose the local council is the government, or the representatives of the government, it was their place.
Yeah.
But there isn't that many of them.
No, I've been homeless on off for 4 years. And every time, same thing, not a priority, can't do nothing.
The victims of homelessness certainly seem to hold the government responsible for their situation, or at least their lack of interest, as described by Christopher, a homeless man originally from Poland who came here to make a better life, but became homeless after losing his job and being unable to find another.
Yes, I have before this benefit for local job, and I finish this benefit because it's 91 days only, and this government is not interesting for helping more, because take chance for me, yeah, for life, this in 3 months, yeah, and there is no more, and it's my problem now. Yeah.
With so much criticism levelled at the government and local councils, I thought it only fair to give them a chance to tell their side of the story. Sadly, when I approached City of Lincoln Council for comment, they did not give me an interview or statement. That said, not all of the official response to homelessness was criticised.
Local authority are very supportive of our service, certainly, and I can't comment on everybody else because I'm not involved with that, but they're certainly very, very supportive of our service. But ultimately, if we've got one person or 10 people sleeping on the streets, it's a problem, and we should have a look at what we're doing and see what we can do.
Local authority here, if there's an example of where the building in Victoria Mills, the building next door to where the people are living is unsafe, so the local authorities housed probably 20 odd people in there for weeks and weeks in a hotel, which is, I think, a pretty good service, really.
However, others, such as Reverend Collymore, remain unconvinced, as he believes that the government response is so standardised that it fails to work.
I can think of one individual whose mother died and the stepfather could not wait to get him out and forced him out of the house, and that the established patterns and systems that have been created these days say you must go back to where you came from. Of course, for him it's absolutely the last thing, so he ended up bouncing around all sorts of places trying to get away from the cause of his homelessness, but the systems as they come down from Whitehall with money attached to deal with it never have the wriggle room to deal with that. I'm afraid a lot of the quite appropriate requirement that government funding is accounted for appropriately creates an almost Soviet-style set of norms that these boxes have to be ticked, irrespective of how effective they are for that individual, because each person is an individual with an individual story and a pathway. And that was one of the most satisfying things from our point of view at this church, was identifying the causes and giving a bespoke solution to the problem rather than a mechanical one.
However, In the Reverend Collymore experience, it's not just central government that is responsible for the problem here in Lincolnshire. Rather, that we are the victims of governmental buck passing to trim the budgets of, or to take the blames for the failings of, other local authorities.
In this city of Lincoln, because we are the only major city surrounded by an awful lot of villages and small towns, we tended to be the place where the homeless were sent from all over the county. And because of the wonderful work of Nomad in the old days and so on, we got to a stage where in 2011-12 we were discovering that social workers in Derby and Manchester were saying to people, you want to go to Lincoln because it's lovely there, they've got all these resources, and it was not helpful. When people get into the pattern of homelessness and established in that, they become quite mobile.
Even within its own county, Lincoln's services for the homeless bring more and more people into the city.
People are attracted to Lincoln. There's an emergency night shelter where people can queue up outside on a nightly basis to try and access. That's not anywhere else in the county. There are not many of them that operate that way in surrounding counties. So perhaps maybe that's an attraction to the city, for want of a better word. There's a prison, there's a hospital, there's some fabulous support services.
However, the homeless people on the area's streets are not just from other cities. In homeless stories from local newspapers, we saw at least 3 Eastern Europeans, 2 of which had lost their lives due to being homeless in Lincolnshire. And those who work with the homeless would agree that those who travel to this country can often become those who suffer on our streets.
In 2010, when the snow fell, we ended up housing 56 Eastern Europeans in our church hall for months because the work that they'd had gone. And how are they going to survive? You know, their passports get sold or stolen. Anything that have a value is gone very quickly. And they have nowhere to turn except petty theft and so on, shoplifting and the like, to survive. And from there on in, the skids are on and life gets very, very bad.
If anyone knows how easy it is to become homeless because you're from another country, it's Christopher. And he explained to me how it is that he came to be homeless and why he thinks he remains that way now.
I lost a job. Yeah, and I worked before in London. And if I'm lost, and I'm stayed in London a long time, later I go to Grimsby because my friend speak to me that it's possible for work. And now it's same situation. My problem is work, and I look at the job, and sometimes no problem. My English is no good for if I'm coming to interview. That's the first question. My country, not from.
James, Mum's got another in my house back in your head. I know. I don't mean on the wall.
Despite the darkness I've seen over this film, there is hope on the horizon for the homeless, as, even while the current night shelter is repainted by a team of volunteers, there are plans to open a new £3 million facility in the area.
Over the course of this documentary, I've met some really great people doing amazing work, like Johnny Goldsmith here in Lincoln and Dean Bell from the Nomad Trust, as well Dave Carlisle and Martin Williams out in Grimsby. The new shelter really does look like hope for homeless people. But that doesn't change what else I've found. The dangers for people on the street, the complicated admissions process keeping them there, and the influx of Eastern Europeans who are just not getting the help they need. And it doesn't change what happened to Genderhaus Budnevik, the man I started this documentary with. I wanted to find out more about this man, what his life was like, which I've done in one respect, but I wanted to learn more, who he was, how he lived before he was homeless. But sadly, I haven't been able to do that despite my best efforts. All I've been able to find is that in 2012 he was living somewhere because he had a court report saying that he was arrested for shoplifting. But that's all. I haven't been able to find out if he had family, where he came from. In every respect, he was a living ghost.